just outside of Atlanta. Yep. How about
Born and
yourself?
raised?
No, born in California, raised in Pennsylvania. So
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a mutt. School in
What
the middle of the country just to mix it up a little.
what took you to Atlanta?
A ministry, actually.
Huh?
So my wife and I got married when I was 20, and we didn't want to go back to Pennsylvania. Some, just not best place for me. Uh, she was from Norway, and I didn't speak a lick of Norwegian, so Norway wasn't really a viable option at the time. And so we were one step away from chucking a dart behind our back at a map. You know what I mean? But we knew some folks who had started a ministry down here, and came down to help them out, and got a couple of part-time jobs along the way. It was a good time.
Man, that's awesome. I'm excited to learn more about you. Let me get you introduced so everybody knows who I'm talking with. Folks, today on the Second Chance podcast, we're honored to welcome Scott Ritzheimer, founder of Scale Architects and a leader dedicated to helping visionaries achieve predictable success. Scott's journey is one of resilience and purpose, born out of both immense personal loss and professional challenges. From navigating the heartbreaking passing of his daughter to building and rebuilding businesses during the time of crisis. Scott's story is a testament of the power of purpose and intentional growth. He's here to share how we can all move beyond autopilot and embrace the evolution necessary to thrive as leaders. Man, that's a lot. I'm excited to learn more, brother.
Jeff, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to dive in.
What tell me about Scale Architects real quick. What is the problem you guys are solving at Scale Architects?
Yeah. So the biggest problem in business is that there's not a problem, right? It'd certainly be nice if there was one. But one of the things that we figured out is, even though there are thousands of problems, there's not just one problem. There's thousands of problems. Right in the middle of those two is a handful, 4 or 5 at the most, at any given point in time, that are the main problems you need to focus on. And so the challenge then is knowing which of the 5 actually matter, right? It can't be the same one all the time. It can't be all of them all the time. What are the few that actually matter? And so at Scale Architects, we've developed a handful of resources that allow us to help businesses and nonprofits recognize what matters right now. In the stage that we're in as a leadership team, in the stage that we're in as an organization, in the stage that you're in as a founder, what are the things that you need to focus on now? How's that different than what brought you success in the past? How will you know when it's going to change in the future? And ultimately, what that allows us to do is help folks say no to the 20, 30, 300 things that are fighting for their attention, so they can really focus on the few that'll actually help.
What give us an example of those problems that are right there nestled in? What are those top
Yeah.
things you see?
One of the biggest challenges, like, it's the stuff that you can't Google, right? How do you Google, we've been losing profitability for 3 years and have no idea why? Go. It's
Yeah,
like try and
yeah,
get a chat GPT response
yeah.
to that. But that's a big one, right? So many of the companies that we serve are in a stage that we call whitewater. And it's this time you've started it, you've had years of success, and it just feels like you run into this glass wall, right? It just kind of hits you out of nowhere. Generally, you'll see revenue still climbing, but profitability starts to fall. And it's one of those things that no matter what you do, it doesn't feel like anything works. I was talking to a guy, founder of a company, and he was like, you know, up until about 6 months ago, I felt like I had a feel for my business. I knew when we had more in the tank. I knew when we had to slow down a little bit. But now it feels like I'm trying to lead this thing with oven mitts on. I can't feel, I can't tell what's going on. And another said, I felt like I had a crystal ball and it was pretty good for a while. And then somehow it got muddy. I don't really know what happened. And it's that feeling of a loss of control, right? I remember for me as a founder, we went through 3 years of declining profitability, which in and of itself is crummy. But in every one of those years, we had a plan to double our profitability, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not just that profitability was falling, it's that we were trying to do the exact opposite, and we're completely powerless to solve it. And so, particularly for the founders I work with, it's that feeling of frustration and powerless. It's like, hey, we're a successful group. Why can't we figure this out? And I help them to understand why that is, what's changed, how to respond. And for most of our companies, they're doing something like, depending on what stage they're in, they're doing something like tripling their bottom line in a year or two, right? It's just these massive, profound differences by adopting the right strategy at the right time.
What um, what kind of inspired you? Doesn't sound like your first business. I think I already know that. But what kind of inspired you to go down this particular niche, and what
Yeah.
kind of helped you hone into this area?
This is where we go way down the rabbit hole. So I shortly after I moved to Atlanta, had an opportunity to work at a small locally owned business for a guy I met at church. And right after he hired me, he actually sold the company to another couple of guys out of Tennessee. And I watched that company just be systematically unintentionally destroyed for about 18 months, right? Everyone wanted the thing to work and nothing worked about it. We went from 13 employees to 2.5, and I was the half. We went from several $1 million in annual revenue to barely having anything come in at all. Just anything you look at, like just across the board, it did not work. And so that was my introduction to the business world. It was like my first real job. And I watched the whole thing implode. And so what ended up happening about 18 months in, and this is September 2008, is the new owners called and said, hey, we've done everything that we can. It's not going to work. And if we keep hanging on to this new business, it's going to sink our old business too. We got to cut and run. So we're throwing in the towel. If you want anything back, you have to come and get it in 24 hours. So the original founder drives up to Tennessee, gets what's like 3 computers and 2, office chairs, most with all the padding worn out of them. Like there's just nothing left of this company, but it was kind of signed a couple of papers and everyone was okay with him taking it back over. And so from the U-Haul, he called and said, Scott, this is what's happened. I don't know if either of us are going to have jobs in a couple of months, but this is what we've got. Will you come and help me relaunch the company, rebuild it? And I had nothing better to do, so I was like, sure, let's give this a shot. Again, September 2008, beginning of the month, we had no idea what was coming. Over the next 6 months, stock market fell 32% or something like that, crazy. And it was just nuts. I mean, it's just that existential fight for survival. We can come back to that stage if we want to later. But to move the story along, we made it through that. We started hiring people. We started selling stuff. Things were growing like crazy. And it was awesome. It was really hard, but it was awesome for about 5-6 years. And during that time, I had taken over as CEO of the company. We were leading it. And that's where we started bumping into some of those profitability issues I talked about, and went through a few years of it. And by the end of 3 years of just having no power or ability to change it, we went from high 20s to low teens, and we're on target to be in the single digits of profit if we didn't figure something out. And that, to me, like your CEO, that's the best indicator of your success as a leader, right? Quantifiably, right? Not qualitatively, but quantifiably. And so I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like we've had all these years of success. What has changed now? And I was actually listening to a podcast like this. It's a big part of why I do podcasts today. Yep. And this gentleman with a funny Irish accent, and I can say that because he's a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine now, but he starts talking about what's probably like the most boring thing in the world, these business life cycle stages. But because he had an Irish accent, it was just enough to keep me focused. And so I'm listening to him, and a couple minutes in, it's like, this guy's got a camera in my office. Like he's just describing everything that's going on. Like, is he reading my emails? What in the world? And it was the very, very first time, Jeff, that I felt like someone had a map of the business world and we were actually on it. Yeah. Because the business we had started in a recession, right? Like there's no plan for that. The business we had started in an industry that wasn't an industry. We were doing, kind of documentation paperwork for churches. Who does that? And so there were several things about our company that were very unique, but what I allowed those to do was isolate me, right? I let that uniqueness feel like, hey, if we can't figure this out, then there's nowhere else to look. Nobody else can. And this gentleman, Les is his name, Les McEwen, he just broke through all of that in a single podcast episode. And so I ended up getting a copy of his book. We went through it as a leadership team. We just followed step by step through what had to change and how to do it. And, similar to what's happened for my clients these days, we tripled our bottom line in 13 months. We went 3x on our profit, not just our revenue. During that time, we cut $1.5 million off of our top line, and we're still able to achieve those results. And I learned a couple things in that season, and then there's a whole other element to this which we'll unpack for this show. But from a business standpoint, I realized I actually love working on businesses. I really, really love to work on businesses. And somewhere in the journey of figuring out what all this was, what this whitewater stage was, this like weird thought hit me completely out of the blue. And that was, if I could help other people avoid this pain, right? If I could help other people get out of this whitewater that's haunted me for years now, if I could do that like all day, every day, I'd die a happy man. And that ultimately kind of set the seeds for, and is the passion behind Scale Architects these days.
You're, when you're sitting in that CEO seat and it's, everything's kind of falling out from under you, and you are measured by profit. My speech and the talk I give on growth's not always up was born out of failure, right?
Yeah.
I was like, my wife's like, well, Jeff, sometimes companies aren't all about, you never, it's not about money. And I go, well, hold on here. The main benchmark in business is how much money you make. And she's like, yeah, but think about this. You learned this. So I was like, all right. So I had to really go hard.
Yeah.
Yourself sitting in that seat and everything's kind of, you're watching it kind of pick apart, and you have this aha moment. I was curious about you. I've been in those moments before where you're like, this dude is, how did it feel to find that answer for yourself, right? And your connection with
Yeah.
Les and all that, like, to feel that.
Yeah.
Because
It's
where
so,
was where was you kind of at? Was you thinking
yeah.
like, I need to get out of here? I'm getting ready to exit. This is
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. I was thinking like I either have to exit or I'm going to be exited. Like that.
Yes.
Like there's just like this thing's not going to keep working, and it's really difficult to put it into words. Actually, right? And I think everyone knows that feeling, but how do you describe it? And the best thing that I can do is say I felt like a 7-year-old kid again. And what I mean by that was, I was 7, 8 years old, somewhere in that ballpark. I went to a mall, right? You and I are old enough to know what malls are. And I went there with my mom, and she wanted to go to JCPenney, which for a 7-year-old boy is just, I mean, it's just agony, right? So I'm thinking like desperately trying to come up with some other solution. Like, what can I do other than go to JCPenney? And over on the side was a Foot Locker store, right? And we did not have a lot when I was growing up, so there's no chance I was buying any of the shoes in there. We were Payless through and through, you know what I mean? But like a boy can look, a boy can dream, right? So I kind of strike this grand bargain with her. I'm going to go to Foot Locker. She's going to go to JCPenney. And then once I'm done looking at shoes, I'll come and find her at JCPenney. And it's like, awesome, right? Like I escaped prison. We're in great shape. So I go into Foot Locker, and there's only so much you can do in there if you don't have money to buy shoes, right? So there's only so much looking that a 7-year-old boy is going to do. And so I got bored pretty quick. I took one step out of Foot Locker and felt this horrible feeling of dread come over me. I'd never been in that particular mall before. I had no idea where JCPenney was, right? And I'm a 7-year-old kid in like the biggest place in the world, is what it felt like. And some stranger, no idea who it is to this day, but must have recognized what was going on. They saw the look on my face, and they walked me just around the corner to, you remember those giant triangle pylons that they had in malls, right?
Yep.
Two sides of them were like bigger than life ads. And then one side was a map, right? And they walked me around to the side of it, pointed to it. And on that map, there's a little red circle. It says, "You are here." And the sense of relief that I got in that moment as a 7-year-old boy, when I saw that on a map, "You are here," I knew that I was somewhere. And then I could just kind of look and ring, like, where's JCPenney from here? And I could map the route between them. That all came because I knew where I was. And so it took me right back to that. It was that exact same feeling. I call it my "you are here" moment. And I felt seen, I felt understood, which all of that sounds kind of crazy for someone who is sitting in the CEO seat. That's one of the aspects of this that's really, really hard to articulate is if you go and complain, oh, our profit's not what I want it to be. It's like first world problems, buddy, or if you say, hey, this is really challenging, you don't know how to solve it. It's like, that's why you get paid the big bucks. Like most folks can't really relate to that. And so there's almost this like, if you're a CEO and you're having trouble, you can't actually have trouble, right? There's this kind of unspoken rule, and that only goes to isolate you even further. And so that "you are here" moment broke through all of that, and it tore down that isolation, and it gave me hope like I had not had in years.
That's a really, really cool association. Because listen, I've been in that ball before, and I've been like, I don't know, gosh, which way do we go? It's a really great association to
Yeah.
help people understand that. Um, you move through until 2017. You had a pretty
Yeah.
significant, super significant event that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Tell us how your losing your daughter reshaped your entire life and career.
Yeah. Massive. It can't not reshape your life and career. I don't
Yeah,
think anyone should ever have to, to see a child pass. And she died in my arms. It was a really, really challenging time. So what had made it hard, and I'm going to try and keep this story as short as I can.
you take your time.
But we had actually been pregnant before. My wife was hit in a hit and run and lost that pregnancy pretty early on. And so coming into the end of 2016 was just kind of a whirlwind, like what's going on? How's this going to happen? And so we actually were surprised that she was pregnant again, right at the end of 2016. And and from the very beginning of the pregnancy, there were just things that weren't quite right. It's just, my wife's pregnancies were always very, very difficult. But it was a challenge. And so like we were dug in. I mean, we were fighting in every way that we needed to fight. My wife was on bed rest at, I think, week 22. Um, which is very early, and we had two little kids at home at the time, and so being on bed rest over the summer with two little kids is not an easy feat. We found out she was going on bed rest 2 days after we had torn every single bathroom and all the light fixtures out of a brand new house, or out of a house that we had just bought. So like my wife's on bed rest, we're doing a renovation, we're having medical challenges with our daughter is on the way, and then our son as well. It was so hard. And so when July 26th came around, and Mia was born early, it was kind of like we made it. She's here, like there was a long time during that pregnancy that we didn't even know we were going to make it that far. And there's this sense of like, we've crossed the finish line, right? That was kind of if you were to boil down where we thought we were at, she was in the NICU, still rough, but it's like, we got her here, we're good to go. Like it's just a matter of time, we're going to be okay. And she was born right around 4 pounds. She was very tiny, had a few kind of cosmetic things and bones that were just not quite right. But all in all, she was very, very healthy for the age that she was, except that she needed to have heart surgery. And she was too small to have that heart surgery. And so for the next just a little under a month, she was in the NICU. We drove down there every single day to go see her. And so it's like, now it's renovation, wife recovering from bed rest, daughter's in the NICU, kids are, starting school, and I'm still CEO of this company. Like how is this supposed to work? It's just juggling nonstop. But made it down there just about, one of us made it down every single day. I didn't make it every day, but one of us did. And, we were just going until we got her out, and so she had heart surgery around the 3.5 week mark. Went fine. The surgery went really well. She was in the cardiac intensive care unit, was recovering really well. But there were like a couple of signs here and there that something wasn't quite right. So they wanted to move her back to the NICU as soon as they could. And the day that we actually stayed in the hospital while she was at the cardiac intensive care unit. And so we were exhausted, 3 days of just nonstop. And the nurse who had talked to for quite a while was like, you just go home. Like, you need to rest. It's going to be okay. We've got her in the NICU now. It's going to be all right. So we made the drive from downtown Atlanta back to our house. And I still remember we got home. The kids were already in bed at the time. And I went and got 2 fingers of whiskey, poured it in a glass, took it upstairs, set it on my bedstand. And we turned on the TV to just mind numb, right? Like, just decompress. And that cup of whiskey sat on my bedstand for 2 weeks. We got a call a few minutes later from the nurse saying, hey, she had taken a turn for the worst. And we're like, well, do we go? Do we stay? She's like, no, just stay. It's going to be all right. We've got her turned around. We'll keep you posted. And I was like, I don't think so. So my wife and I got out of pajamas, back into regular clothes, drove down. As we're walking through the hallway at the base level of the hospital, the nurse calls again and says, you need to be here. She's not breathing well. And I still remember, Jeff, we walked into the NICU and her bed was the second or third from the door. And when we walked into the NICU, you couldn't actually walk into the NICU because there were so many doctors and nurses. There was like medical debris, like all the stuff that they use around the stuff that they use, it was all over the floor. It was everywhere. There were people everywhere. And in the middle of all the chaos was my little 1-month-old baby girl. And she was this crazy hue of like purple and blue and just, it was the worst feeling that a dad could ever have, and she looked like she was already dead at that time. She was not. Her heart was still beating. And I just went into shock, almost passed out. And my wife, to her credit, walked up and started, talking to her and singing to her. And we stayed with her the rest of the night. I was holding her in my arms, and she passed that night. It was August 26, 2017. And like you said, coming in, it just totally rattled my world. Totally rattled my world. And you go through something like that, you fight so hard for so long for something so real, right? And it shook everything. It shook my faith. It shook, my, shook my marriage. Fortunately, it actually made us stronger. But we really had to fight, my wife and I. The statistics around marriage, coming out of something like that are horrible. It's somewhere in the 60-70% divorce rate within the first couple of years. And we felt that, and so, yeah, it was just it was a whole lot to really work through. And the biggest things that come out of that, and you can ask any questions that you'd like, but several years removed from this now, and having had an opportunity to process it, there's a couple things that became really important. And in the order of discovery for me, the first one is love your kids well. You have no idea how long you have them, and so just love them well. And I'm not perfect at that, but I'm a different dad than I was before.
Yeah.
And the next one that came along was this life is way too short to be on autopilot, right? Like there's just, I was cruising in a couple different places in my life, and it's like, what are you doing? It's just, it was not the thing. One of those was being CEO of the company that I had helped start. I knew it was not where I was supposed to be. And again, ultimately that led to starting Scale Architects. But the biggest lesson that I learned from all of it, and as a Christian, I think the most profound one for me, is that there is always another chapter, right? Like, no matter how hard it is, no matter how great it is, no matter what you're going through right now today, wherever you're sitting listening to this, there's always another chapter. And that was unimaginable the day that she passed. The idea that life could go on without her was unimaginable. but fast forward years, and I'd give anything to get her back. Don't get me wrong. We've had a third child along the way. We actually adopted our third. Her name is Isabel,
Yeah.
and she is the most amazing kid. And it's just every day that I get, we make pancakes every day for breakfast. She comes down usually when I'm working out, and we go upstairs. We make pancakes together, and I get to put her to bed every night. It's just the magic of those little moments. I would not have believed that magic was even possible, in the days after Mia passed. But I get to experience them every single day with this wonderful little girl named Isabel. And, she's not Mia. She'll never be Mia. I don't want her to be Mia. But Mia helped me to love her and her two brothers, Benjamin and Liam, all the better.
I noticed that in some of our notes, we talked about purpose. Do you think this was your defining moment? Sounded like you had a lot of purpose, turned the company around. But do you feel like this really helped define what your purpose actually was?
It did, and interestingly, my purpose is in the business world. I love the business world, and so it's not like a pursuit of profit kind of a thing or anything like that. There's something special about work, right? And even in my own recovery coming through it, work was a place of consistency and stability. It was a place where I could add value and create. And in many ways, it was a shelter from a lot of the reality that I was dealing with at home. And so that can be good and it can be bad. But coming out of it, I was really struck with, through a whole series of events, just the nobility of work. Right? There's so many people now, especially my age or even younger, that treat work as this thing to be avoided at all costs, right? And the reality of it is, when you look at people who are stepping into purpose, show me one person pursuing their purpose without work, right? Not that
Yeah.
it has to be drudgery, although there's an element of that included, but I can't think of any part of anything significant that's done without having to work for it, and so work is just one of those places, and building organizations that can do that. And so coming out of, what we had to do to turn around the company, it was happening at the same time, by the way, and learning what it took to turn that around. And knowing that I don't want to just keep doing the CEO thing. I want to help other CEOs. I want to give the conclusion I came to was I wanted to give the best years of my career to helping other CEOs to achieve their visions, their dreams. And the degree and the amount of purpose that I get from that is just outrageous. And so, having the opportunity coming out of that, we went through a lot around how to make sure that company survived and thrived, and even when I was gone. So it took some time, but coming through all of that, 2020 was when I officially exited that business and started another one. So I'm 2 for 2 on starting, my primary businesses right before a global recession starts. So if I start anything, I'll tell you, we'll short everything and we'll both make a lot of money in the next one. But 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 it, and it was hard. Like the 2020 season was really tough, and even with some family stuff, we were in the process of adoption through all of that, but it was just nothing compared to what we'd already been through and survived. Like when you walk through something like that and survive, it takes a whole hell of a lot to really knock
Yeah.
you down and keep you down.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes CEO stuff so small, right? It just makes like that bottom line, top line, everything in between. It makes that stuff just seem like small feats. Yeah, question why you put so much emphasis on things that are right. Um, when you look at that, you touched you touched a couple things there, talking about like your next chapters, and I preach that a lot. Is if so many times, and I did the same thing. Like I was hit a little rock bottom phase, and I was kicking the can. I didn't realize I had another day. I was too caught up in my own selfishness, my own emotions, and my own
Yeah.
stuff to realize life was giving me another day to go make a difference.
Yeah.
Um, it was being able to recognize that, and you spoke to that, and that's something I think that our listeners, if you tune into the Second Chance podcast, you're need. Yeah, it's something I enjoy getting out of every episode. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
this is where you were, and when you're caught up in what you were, man, it's hard to recognize that. It's hard to look in and see that, and then you talked about. I was going to ask you about this. Life's too short to live on autopilot.
Yeah.
Um, Very powerful statement when you mix in and get to know you in the short time that I have of going through the motions. What are some steps that you would recommend leaders take to live and lead intentionally rather than
Yeah.
going through the motions?
The very first one, and this is actually surprising with a lot of folks, and I don't think most folks would self-diagnose that this is a challenge, but you've got to be clear on what you want,
Yeah.
right? And most folks could tell me, I'm trying to do this. I want this. But do you want that? And if so, why? Right? You ask someone why on their goals a couple of times, and you realize they have no idea. And it's actually not their goal at all. It's someone else's goal that they've borrowed. It's
Right.
someone else's expectation that they're still trying to achieve. It's someone else's shoes that they're still trying to fill. And so a huge part of the problem for, especially the folks that I work with, for founders, is if you as a founder don't set a clear vision, clear, compelling vision for where you're going, who is going to? Nobody else can, right? And when you're borrowing someone else's vision for your company, right? I have to be a $10 million company. Why? Because it's not exciting you, right? It's definitely not going to excite your people. And so the first thing when it comes to this whole notion of autopilot is you have to be clear on what you want. And you have to wrestle that down until it's actually what you want. And that may not look like what anybody else wants. It might not look like what anyone else in your business group wants. It might not look like what you've chased for your entire career. But if it's what you want, then I mean, it's almost magical in the sense, particularly with founders, that once they're actually clear on what they want, they can learn almost anything, right? They can make almost any change within the realm of what would be necessary to do that. People are unbelievably capable when they are clear on where they're going, and someone can help show the steps between where they are and where they want to get to.
That's man, that's and you're right, man. We all jump into what everybody else has. I want what they got.
Yeah.
And finding what you want. I kind of helped a lady before our call. I was working through a coaching client, and she was working on her bed. We were kind of just going through her things, and she was trying to figure out her plan. And I go, what do you want? And it was like no one had asked her.
Yeah.
I was like, what, how much money do you want to make? How much do you want to work? Where do you see this? And
Yes.
when we overlook that, we get caught up in everybody else's stuff. Tell me about the book, Founders Evolution.
So
What was
here's the problem with that. In the world of founders, here's the practical problem with not going after what you want, is that to get to whatever that destination is, the person who has to change the most inside your organization is you. Right?
Yeah.
And so the vast majority of founders start their business or nonprofit for the freedom and autonomy that comes with it, the ability to go after it their way. Yet they find themselves 5 and 6 years in going after someone else's goal, right? That's the exact opposite of freedom and autonomy. You've totally given that up. And so what that looks like is they're frustrated with their people, thinking, what's wrong with these people, right? They're completely disillusioned by the effectiveness of their enterprise, right? Is this it? Like, did I really fight all these years to make a business that does this?
Yeah.
They're uninspired by their goals and their vision for the company, and they're looking for a way out. And so if you try and tackle those problems without helping them get clear on a vision, it's just not going to work. But even once you've clarified the vision, then what has to happen is you have to walk the steps between here and there. And those steps are different. They're not all the same. More successful than you are today is not more of the same, right?
Right.
And so what the book does is takes the mystery out of what is usually a guess and check model, right? I'm going to try everything and then take the things that work. And the book outlines the 7 stages that founders go through. So if you want to build a business of this size and you've got to get to stage 5, the chief executive, well, you have to get through stage 4 to get there. And there's a very specific problem that you'll have at stage 4. There's a very specific solution at stage 4. And so if you try and fight all the things all at the same time, you don't win at any of them. But if you can understand exactly what you need to do right now, and that's what the book does, helps you understand what stage you're in and exactly what to do in that stage, then again, you just focus on that one thing, maybe 2 things, 3 things at the most, and let everything else, you can let those things go on autopilot, and you'll find just an enormous amount of success with a fraction of the hustle and stress. And so the book outlines all 7 stages. It talks through why each of these stages exist on the journey and how to succeed in each one.
Where can folks find that, Scott?
Yeah, they can find it on our website, scalearchitects.com/founders.
Real quick, tell me, I know it's founders, it's easy for me to follow, but just so for the sake of, who's your ideal client and who would you like to reach out for you?
Yep. So we help founders from pre-launch to post-exit. I do the vast majority of my work right in the middle of that journey in what we call stages 3, 4, and 5. And these are folks who have a team around them. They're wanting to build up. Many of them are wanting to scale up, and they're just coming into the limitations of themselves and their team. And so that's the vast majority of who I work with. Founders everyone wants a number, and there's not really a number, but 1 to 10, $15 million, somewhere in that ballpark is where most of this happens. And they want to get to the next level. They just need someone to show them the way.
Man, that's awesome. Hey, what was you going to be when you was a little kid? When you was
What
that
was I gonna-
7-year-old,
so
when
I
that
was
7-year-old in the mall, what was you going to be when you was a little kid?
I was going to be an architect. That's a big
Yes.
part of that's yeah. So I don't have the patience or attention to detail to be like a real architect. So that one quickly went away. But what architects do for buildings, we do for businesses.
Yeah, man.
And that's the sweet spot for me.
You've experienced something that a lot of folks won't ever go through, and we hope that folks don't have to go through that,
Yeah.
even though we know it'll happen. And it's amazing to see you use that as a superpower and something that strengthens you and your family in the work that you do inside of businesses. If you listen to me, if you ever hear me talk, I'll talk about my time in public safety, where you deal a lot with life and death. And
Yeah.
when you deal a lot with life and death, you approach a lot of other aspects of your life and world from a way different perspective, because hey, I'm here and I get to contribute to the solution, not necessarily the problem.
Yeah.
And man, I really appreciate you coming on today, sharing your story, second chance story with us, and just helping us all be better. And can't wait to share this episode, man, and get to know you. Hopefully down the road we can loop back in, talk about a cool project you're working on or something other. But I appreciate you being with us today.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for allowing me to be on here and share my story.